Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Mariette Westermann. I'm the Vice Chancellor of New York University Abu Dhabi, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all to my roundtable this afternoon, one to which I've been looking forward to a tremendous amount. My guest today is Her Excellency Sarah Al Amiri, who, as you know, is the UAE Minister for Advanced Technology, Minister of State, and she is also the chairwoman of the UAE Space Agency. Before we begin our conversation, and while people trickle in, let me remind you a little bit about what the Roundtable is about. We started this program over a year ago now to have regular conversations with leaders of sectors, leaders of different industries, leaders of government agencies, ministries, embassies, and of course various industries, businesses that interest us, and nonprofit organizations as well. And we had these conversations to open up to university students. We also have faculty joining us. I could see we have faculty here today, and alumni, to really ask these leaders how it is that they came to be in the positions that they are, how they go about leading these institutions and think about that, how they work to promote the effectiveness of their organizations, their industries, or also the diversity and equity within them. And so we've talked with museum directors already this year. We've spoken with a business leader from the Lulu Group just last week. Last year we spoke with banking executives, we spoke with ambassadors, we spoke with venture capitalists, all sorts of people, philanthropists, and it's always a really rich conversation. You are welcome to put questions and comments in the Q&A box. We will get to them. We will talk with you through the afternoon. We will talk. Her Excellency and I will speak for about 45 minutes or so and then begin to open it up to questions. But if you have questions sooner, don't hold back, put them in. We tend to just bring them in as we have this conversation. Let me first introduce our guest today, and I hope that she will appear on the screen. There she is now. As I said, her name is Sarah Al Amiri, the UAE Minister of State for Advanced Technology. Now, in her role in this important ministry, she empowers the development and the adoption of the technologies that are propelling the fourth industrial revolution, also here across the Emirates. You know how much interest there is in artificial intelligence in its many dimensions. And a very significant portion of her portfolio, I should say, entails promoting research and development in the advanced science and technology sector. And the very fact that that is her role often brings us, Sarah, in important conversations and potential partnership with your ministry. As chairwoman of the Space Agency, she is also responsible for overseeing its mandate to guide the space sector in the country and ensuring that it makes the vigorous contribution that it already does to the national economy, to the knowledge economy transformation, and to the sustainable development of the United Arab Emirates. Space has long been a special passion for her. She built and led the UAE science team for the Mars probe that is an inspiration to all of us in the UAE and so many around the world, and especially so many young scientists and engineers around the world. Her Excellency is also the chairwoman of the Emirates Scientists Council, the chairwoman of the Fourth Industrial Revolution Council, and also of the Dubai Future Academy Board of Trustees. Previously, she was the head of R&D at the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, where she was involved with important satellite development programs such as Dubai Sat 1, Dubai Sat 2, and the establishment of the Khalifa Sat program. In 2015, the World Economic Forum honored Her Excellency as one of its 50 young scientists for her contributions to science, technology, and engineering. And those contributions, I want to say, have only magnified and amplified and multiplied since then. I am very happy to say that education holds a very special place in her heart and in her work. She herself holds bachelor's and master's degrees in computer engineering from the American University of Sharjah, our important fellow American institution here. And she did us a great honor last May with her incredibly meaningful commencement address to our brave and resilient class of 2021. I still, Sarah, get comments about that. So here we go. I want to say welcome to you very much to our roundtable.
Thank you, Mariette. It's actually a privilege to be here with you today.
Wonderful. And before we launch into some of the questions that we want to discuss with you, of course, in this very special week, I want to wish you the warmest congratulations and good wishes on the 50th anniversary of the founding of the United Arab Emirates. Elf Mabruk. Really a moment.
Absolutely.
So let's start with some questions about your role. When our students see influential leaders and effective leaders like yourself, it's often very hard to imagine how you got started, how you arrived there. Could you tell us how you began your career journey and how it evolved?
So I started working in 2009. I think you very elaborately spoke about key milestones, but I started working as a software developer within a know-how transfer program to build capabilities for engineers in designing and developing satellites. The earliest program that I worked on was Dubai Sat-1. The spacecraft was done in terms of design. I was meant to be part of the team that was developing the ground control software for Dubai Sat-2, and therefore I worked initially during the launch of Dubai Sat-1 on operating the spacecraft to better understand the interface that the team needs to go through to be able to command spacecrafts from the ground, monitor progress, better understand the usability of it prior to working on its design. And just continued on that path. In parallel, I was really interested. I love being an engineer and designing systems and designing software and understanding how it integrates well with hardware. But at the same time, I was really interested with the overarching aspect of why the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center was even established. And that was to build capabilities and know-how. And for some reason, I was really intrigued about knowledge systems and how do you build experience and how do you teach people to do things? How do you establish sectors that never were established before? What is the role of research and development in enabling all of that? And then how do you design programs around capability and capacity development and build partnerships, especially in the space sector where you need to build partnerships internationally to be able to gain the necessary experience. And slowly I started transitioning from being an engineer doing software design to someone who works with regards to policy design and program design at the same time. And I think that prepared me, at least personally. It was something that I was really interested in, prepared me for the role that I'm currently doing, which sort of is a macro version of what I was doing when I was heading up research and development in the Space Center.
Yeah, what a wonderful trajectory you just described. And I want to click on that expertise and your love of actually software engineering. And I think it's often easy forgotten that even the greatest leaders at some point were deep in the weeds, the passion of certain fields. Today, I do very little art history, for example, but it still drove me to be curious and to get into the academy. So I think it's very parallel. When, even before you went to university, when did you know you were interested in science and wanted to really pursue science as a student?
I really enjoyed math. And I enjoyed not science per se, but the experiments that ran into science, so the practicality of it. But just the structured way that math was broken down was something that just spoke to my mind. I was really passionate about it. And I was lucky to have a programming platform and being able to program at a very young age in school. It was very basic. But at the same time, it gave me a certain exposure into programming and computers and what computers can do and what you can tell computers what to do. And just merging those two together as I continued my education in school towards high school, it was very evident that the logic that I loved in math existed in algorithms and the logic that allows computers to perform things and allows you to design computers. And that sort of was an amalgamation between the two. When did I want to be a computer engineer? I recall writing an essay in the 5th grade of what you want to be when you grow up. And that's when I put down computer engineering. I didn't know the full gist of it, but I knew that it had something to do with either building computers or telling computers what to do, which sounded interesting.
That's quite early. That's very impressive. And it's also impressive that the school supported your ambitions and your hopes. You clearly were inspired there. And, you know, we often talk about women in science and engineering and how it's so important to start that early on. And clearly that was possible for you in the school, which is a wonderful thing. Looking back on your university experience, how do you think that shaped you or shaped where you are? Was it all about primarily about the engineering, or were there other aspects about university life that you think prepared you for this merger of policy, leadership, and science?
I think I strongly believe that university life isn't about the courses that you take. I would say that was 20 to 30% of what I've learned in university, especially if you talk about my core engineering courses. That gave me sort of the context by which I can work. But the character building aspect was deeply embedded in relationships, deeply embedded in electives that I took, in conversations that I held, in discussions that I was part of. And largely that was part of my growth journey as a person, and allowed me to better explore what I liked, what I disliked, what I was passionate about, where the opportunities existed, just by being within campus and having that sort of microbiome of ideas and discoveries, and I think a breadth of and an allowance of making mistakes and learning from them. Just the overall experience was something that built me quite differently than what I was as a graduate from high school. The 4 years and a half that I was in college were, I would say, instrumental to my personality today, and what I've learned and how I think about things and how I've experienced things.
Yes, I think AUS does a marvelous job of that as well. And you're right, courses are important, but are only a piece of what you learn. And it's the kind of living and working together that is so important. It's really beautiful how you said that. And I think along the way, I imagine you encountered various mentors, maybe also later or earlier in life than the university. We spend a lot of time talking and thinking about mentorship in the university. Is there a mentor or person you would say had a significant impact on your journey?
I would say quite a few people. At least I approach mentorship less formally than what people are used to. So I'm from the school of thought that I learn from everyone around me, and that everyone has a piece to teach other people, and therefore, I think I've learned from so many people in my life, and observed what they're doing and listened to what the perspective is, whether or not I agreed or disagreed with it. And perhaps that's deeply stemmed from being able to grow up at an environment that was truly international. So I grew up in an international school with people from so many different backgrounds, so many different perspectives. And that's sort of an openness that, yes, we all think differently. There's no true right or wrong or black and white, and being open to understanding others and their journey is important. You want me to mention a name?
If there's someone, it's always,
There,
you may not have to mention the name. You could describe the person. It depends on what you're comfortable doing. Yeah.
yeah, so generally speaking, growing up, and you spoke about STEM, and this is something why I think having it wasn't a role model for me per se. I didn't say that this person was my role model, but it's something that I grew up seeing. So I had family, I was at a time where I wrote that essay in the 5th grade saying that I would become a computer engineer. I had siblings, 2 of my sisters studying medicine and engineering. I had family members who were women who were in training for either medicine or fields that are related to STEM. And for me, in retrospect, that normalized fields of STEM for women for me. Without them knowing, without even me realizing that, but it just gave me a platform of opportunity. And during my work in terms of the policy field, I would say, especially during my time on the Emirates Mars mission, a very prominent person that I learned so much from and continue to do today is the program director of the Emirates Mars mission, Omran. He has an interesting way of putting together technical details, and he discuss technology and how it impacts, for example, public policy or politics in another country. It was an interesting way to see how things linked up together. What was the common thread? What was the underlying perspective? And it was a lot of these conversations, I think, built me as a person in terms of understanding truly how interconnected things were, and being able to question things and look at it from different angles and so on. So that's something that I continue to learn from him. Again, there's many people, I don't want to continue naming names, but there's many people that have provided instances where that has impacted me personally, and I think moving forward will continue to do so.
How you describe your answer to this question, which I have asked all of the 15 people or so who've been on this around this table before, is innovative, I would say, in that you distinguish role models from mentors. They can be both, of course, but there are different possibilities have to be open to you to be able to see that you can do things. And I love the fact that you point to women in your family we often don't think of them as mentors, but of course they also are people in one's own family. And then indeed in professional settings, in educational settings, there will be others. And at different times of one's life, other mentors come in and they're needed, and you never lose the value of mentorship. You also, of course, become a mentor, which is an interesting idea as well. Can you say a little bit about your own mentoring practice? What you do to mentor others who look up to you?
So I work very closely. I'll speak to my team. So I work very closely with my team. We have an open work environment where dialogue is 2 ways. And that, I think, is fundamental to any mentorship, be it formal or otherwise, or any form of relationship that's built that encourages joint personal growth. And that's how I look at mentorship. It's not only about you're mentoring somebody, it's a joint sort of effort and growth. And I had the pleasure of working with one of your own at NYU, Abdabi Nof, during the National Mentorship Program, National Professionals Development Program. And that has been, I've learned from her as much as she's probably learned from me. And for me, it's about dialogue. It's about being open to being vulnerable. That's usually hard. And it's a 2-way stream in terms of being open, talking about your doubts, talking about potential opportunities, even talking about things that sound completely off or completely wrong, and being able to reflect on it and have somebody to bounce ideas off of. I truly believe that our growth as individuals is with the growth of everyone around you. Otherwise, you're not really growing, you're really stagnating. And that's generally the way that I approach it. And like I said, I look at it as a 2-way journey. I continue to learn from people.
You've referenced the importance of being able to make mistakes and not not think that that's somehow a failure. Mistakes are not always a failure. It's what you do with them, I think. And then also saying vulnerability, sharing both as a mentor and a mentee. That's indeed a wonderful way of describing the space that has to be opened if it's going to be productive. Thank you very much for that. Now, Sarah, you already talked a little bit about the gender component to your being able to see yourself as that fifth grade girl becoming a scientist potentially. It obviously didn't phase you. We know, of course, that to this day, the majority of the world's scientists and engineers are men. The percentage of women in STEM fields is certainly growing, and that's a good thing, but the imbalance remains pretty pronounced. What has it been like for you as a woman to become a leader in the STEM disciplines? And are there ways in which you can see promoting the success of others to gain greater gender parity and balance?
So I get asked forms of this question quite a
Sure.
lot, and it
Sure.
enabled me to retrospectively think about it, because for me, like I said, growing up, it wasn't an issue, nor was it during my work life. It doesn't mean that there were hindrances or weren't. It was just something that I was deaf to and blind to, personally. And perhaps it was an intrinsic choice that not blindly, but just removed all of the noise that's associated to inhibiting growth. And that's what I continue to do personally on so many different levels. It's not only about being a woman or otherwise. But with regards to continuing enabling women, I think one of the enabling gender parity, especially in STEM, because it's very important. It's very important to do it across the board, but in STEM, it impacts things that impact our daily lives, be it the outcomes of research, the adoption of technology, the development of technology, scientific outcomes, and so on. I truly believe that it impacts our life. And the dialogue needs to always start with the acknowledgement that we all have inherent biases. And it's not because we want to be biased against one gender versus another, but it's what we've picked up growing up. It's what's considered at some point a norm, when today retrospectively thinking is not a norm. So acknowledging that there is an inherent bias, and it's not always an intentional one. Intentional ones are easy to remove through policies and so on. Inherent biases requires an acknowledgement that it's there, and it allows you to retrospectively question some of the decisions, even when it comes to hiring and so on. If you know that you have inherent bias, you would go back and think to yourself, okay, so did I hire this person over that one because of some bias that I've had, some preperceptions, some stereotype? And it's enabling these conversations that you're able to make this happen. In the UAE's perspective for STEM, I think we have a leaky pipeline regardless of gender. And that's something that we've sort of had this conversation so many times with regards to the outcome. It's just not a lot of people continue on in the STEM career. The challenges of women are sometimes different, but in the context of the UAE, we found that the challenges for both women and men were sort of similar. So it's the challenges of the ecosystem, and addressing those are very important. Building institutions that then intrinsically become blind during the hiring process, and having a system of checks and balances as you move forward with regards to people moving forward in their careers and advancing in their careers, and ensuring that there's a form within institutions, because you need to institutionalize. There's a form of checks and balances that asks, okay, why did this person not move ahead? Is it because of biases that exist within the organization, or is it truly due to capability? At the end of the day, no woman, and I'll speak to myself, I don't want to ever go into a position because somebody had a quota of filling this position due to diversity or something, or something close to that. And therefore putting in a system that allows capabilities to shine, competitiveness to be fair, and allowing us to acknowledge and revisit this, because at the end of the day, it's human nature to create preperceptions and forms of perspectives, but it's always good to revisit those and better understand them. So I still don't have a formula for success, but that's what I use in terms of understanding how to ensure in public policy internationally that we're continuously addressing gender parity in STEM.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear you say that, because I agree with you. You were obviously very much encouraged and successful. I was similarly lucky. People just thought that I could do these things and lead things, and not in science, but still at a time that maybe not as many women would have had the opportunities I got. And it's easy then to forget that it's not so easy for everyone else. And clearly, your leadership in always being aware that these little biases slip in and have big outcomes, often negative outcomes, is so important. Let us talk a little bit about the sector that really you are so closely identified with, that of space exploration and the innovation associated with it in the UAE. So, as you know, I was I don't want to say space nerd because I think it's beautiful, but I was, as a child, as you know, very interested in astronomy and space science, and I am to this day. And I've always been amazed at the fact that governments invest so much and are willing to invest in space exploration and even travel when it's really resource intensive and there are lots of needs to be served on our very planet. And so I was wondering if you would speak a little bit about what you think the reasons are that governments invest so much in space.
One, it's pure human curiosity. We want to know more. We have a lot of unanswered questions and we want to know more. Another one would be the ripple effects that it has on society. We do know the space race started for political reasons, and I'll put that out there. It started for political reasons, but political will always needs to be there. But from going into it, exploration is very important. The impact and outcome, the indirect impact that's very hard to quantify, and I think we all lived it here in the UAE, of impact to technology development, impact to scientific understanding, impact in fundamental research that we all know and appreciate needs to remain undirected. And due to the beauty of it being undirected, you don't really know what the outcomes are. You know the outcomes are going to be several fold higher from past experience, from other scientific discoveries. And that's the reason why countries continue to invest in space. It's an aspirational area. It provides you answers to questions that you didn't know that you needed to ask, but are necessary to our joint human understanding and our joint human journey of discovery. Yes, there are priorities and aspects that need to be fixed here on Earth, but we need not forget that a lot of those require space technologies. We do, whether we know it or not, on a daily basis, we all have access to a form of space technology, be it past space technology or current space technology. And it's part of what makes us an interconnected civilization today. And it will be part of what continues to interconnect us as humanity across the globe. And therefore, in public policy sphere, striking the right balance when it comes to spending, ensuring that it's sustainable. So for example, for us in the UAE, sustainability means that it needs to also be backed up by the private sector. So you need to create business in the private sector. So that ensures that development is continued to be in place. And a lot of countries are taking that path forward. And another aspect of it is the aspirational aspect. In February, I just never realized that was going to be the impact of this mission. Just the number of people that were involved, the impact it's had positively on the UAE as a whole. It legitimized that we are a nation that are serious about science and technology. It's no longer something that you declare. And this is comments that I've gotten across the globe. It's nobody has gone and done a first mission to explore another planet and ensuring that mission provided new scientific data. That's already just risky from the get-go. But the fact that the UAE did it means that we are serious. When we talk about developing our science and technology capability, we're serious about it. And it's enabled us to have a lot of conversations and start rethinking how you want to further establish your different sectors. And Mariette, I think you said it, I'm very passionate about space. So I'm speaking to you here, probably the most biased person about the space sector. But I've palpably seen the impact of it. And if I put space aside, I've seen it in my portfolio of advanced technology within the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology. And that's about direct economic impact. And it's helped and aided quite a lot in advancing quite a few things that are very important for the sustainability of our economy and the sustainability of so many different sectors within our economy and also within our way of living.
Well, I think this is a wonderful, comprehensive answer. And of course, I'm completely on board for the curiosity driven and aspirational aspect of this. The fact that the UAE, I think, fifth country to go to Mars and just past the moon, just went straight to that much more difficult uh, orbital journey, then that was successful. Those were some tense moments, I imagine. Let me just ask you about that moment because we all witnessed it, of course, either at the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center or on our TVs. What was that like? How nervous were you, and how did you manage your nerves?
I was extremely nervous. It's 6 years and a bit of work, 7 years for me at the time, resting on 20 minutes. It's not easy. It's not easy to face. And then doing it publicly, live, across the world, during a time where two of the largest nations were right behind you in terms of arriving to Mars. So it was the Mars month where China was supposed to arrive, the US was supposed to arrive after that. And it's just, I don't recall much of that day, but I recall the successful arrival and then the moments after that where I recall speaking. Maybe the only other person that understands a lot of the feelings that went through is Omran. And I remember speaking to him and said, I just felt like somebody, like I've been carrying an entire weight and it's been lifted in a moment off my shoulders. And it's just, it's very hard. It's very hard to describe. People that work in the space sector understand the roller coaster of emotions because there's so many moments that rests on, it's either successful or not, regardless of what you did.
Right. Yeah.
And it's very hard to go through these moments where you know that regardless of how hard you worked, of how you've ensured that you've checked every single box and understood everything that could possibly go wrong and designed around it, you have absolutely no control about the outcome. It was a massive lesson to learn over the course of the last 7 years, 2013, 7 years. And it was much different than any of the experience that I've had before that in the space sector.
Well, it's remarkable how you carried it off. And although I agree with you that in the end, that final orbital moment, there is a lot, there could be a little speck of dust, who knows? But I still think you did your homework extremely well and built that team. So I think it's not entirely a coincidence that it came off so well. And there were just cheers of joy around the country in all our living rooms as we saw this go well. And of course, so much rode on it, in part because of that large financial and national hope investment. We have some great questions along these lines from the audience here, and you're welcome to keep putting questions in. Christopher asks, he thanks you for being here and says, is the UAE planning to play across the entire space industry value chain? So from these simple things that we've all learned to do, like making the right lab gloves, hairnets, all the way to making space-specific chips. Or is there a part of that value chain that the nation intends to focus on? Are there some areas?
Definitely not the whole value chain. It makes no sense for the UAE coming in with just 12, 13 years of space development experience, 24 years of working in the space sector as a whole to develop everything A to Z. Not a lot of countries have achieved that actually, globally. And therefore, yes, there are parts of the value chain that we're looking at, and we're looking at it from the capability and capacity development perspective. And second, from a perspective of where we can enter into in the space economy. So private company focus. So in terms of Earth observation, so imaging Earth, be it visible or using different wavelengths, the area to enter into this due to a large increase of number of satellites that are currently around orbit and due to relatively large reduction in cost of production and also cost of launch, you have a lot of data about space. So companies that are established in analysis and providing products and services and knowledge and information from the back of utilizing a lot of satellites and ground-based systems for urban development, for climate change, for so many different, for farming and better farming practices, there is an entry point that the UAE can enter into. So that's one area in terms of the business aspects of things. The second one is communications satellite are going to change. So the same way that we see the lower parts of Earth orbit being utilized for images, we're going to see satellites that are usually considered relatively very expensive going down to low Earth orbit with these mega constellations that we're seeing companies invest in. And what that means is that our communications methodology is going to change. The connection between satellite communications and ground-based communications is going to change significantly. And that would be an area to invest in, both from a development perspective and also from a utilization perspective. So I spoke about what are you going to use, and that's the perspective that we've looked at. So at the end of the day, space sector in the UAE will be sustainable. There's demand for it. So the two aspects that I just spoke about is demand. Now, going back, then what is the development arm that's going to go there? So there's going to be a focus on space systems engineering, which is very important, and then capabilities that go on top of that. So the onboard computer, basically the brain of the spacecraft, is very important, and how you design it and design the software there. Optimizing ground-based systems so that you can lower cost, investing in facilities here and testing facilities so that it becomes a joint resource. That's the infrastructure investment that needs to go into place, and so on. And so we select the areas and technologies that go into spacecraft based on what gives those spacecrafts an edge, either in the Earth observation market or in the communications market. Then comes the overarching, so exploration. You always use exploration missions for scientific purposes, so curiosity and answering scientific questions, and for expediting development. So you get a very tough mission and you're able to rally capabilities around that. So you use exploration missions, and hence our new mission to build those capabilities. So that way you ensure that you have a comprehensive and robust space economy within the country.
Yeah, that's a very interesting interaction. And I've always been fascinated that, and our students are very interested in the kind of research that can be done at the International Space Station or in any of these missions that you've described. And in fact, they even participated with some HCT students and with the Space Agency in sending a research project to the ISS. What is it, can you help us understand how it is that research in space, in those kinds of environments, yields different results from what you might get on Earth? What is the upside of doing these things in space?
So most of the results that happen within the International Space Station utilize microgravity. So it's addressing different research areas, but introducing a different environment, which is the space environment. So those are experiments that are conducted within the International Space Station or within space itself. Within Earth orbit itself. Then comes the aspects of what else could we do with regards to exploration. If it's not sending an experiment up to utilize microgravity or the space environment, what it is that we do. We need to understand why is our planet different than the other planets in our solar system? Why does it carry life? What are the fundamental building blocks of life as we know it? How do planets evolve with time? What exists out there other than our planet? And it's just a general understanding on the dynamics of planets, on solar systems, on galaxies. And sometimes you can do it by Earth-based systems, radio telescopes and normal telescopes. Sometimes you sell telescopes towards around Earth and do it there. Or sometimes you need to send a spacecraft, if it's feasible, to the planet to be able to study it in depth. And you can think of it as the resolution of your microscope and how deep you can go into understanding a particle. And it's the same thing with space. The closer you are to it, so the better your lens system is, the more you send there, the better you understand about the system itself. And because it's undirected and because a lot of it is based on theories, you don't really know until you go there. And actually, that's one of the challenges of our upcoming mission. And it's because asteroids haven't been mapped in person, like close at all. Maybe we visited less than 20 asteroids. And right now with the team, it's really difficult to sort of you have grainy images of it, you know that it exists, you understand their orbits and so on, but you really don't know until you get there if you can land on it, because there could be a boulder or something in place. And those are interesting discoveries that you need to do to be able to better understand a plethora of questions about planets and in our solar system, in our galaxy, in our universe.
Wonderful answer. And, you know, from a humanities perspective, I always quote this wonderful writer, Zora Neale Thurston, who said, "You've got to go there to know there." And this is true for space as much as it is for our own planet. You know, since you raised the question of the Venus asteroid belt mission, I want to relay a question here from Dave Russell, who is the head of physics. And Dave would like to know if you could tell us a little bit more about this recently announced mission, especially some of the science goals and plans for instruments, because actually, as I may have mentioned, I may not have told you this yet, we are really much hoping to create a PhD in astrophysics and space science, really bringing them together. And so it might even affect our academic strategy to know a little bit more, if you can say it at this point, what some of the science goals are.
So we're currently narrowing it down. We should finish the mission concept that will have a clear science questions, our objectives, the various platforms and instruments that will go on board by hopefully the first quarter of next year. So I don't want to talk about anything because we might cut it out and people will be disappointed. So if you're directing policy, then I would say let's wait till next year, once we've narrowed everything down, understood the risks that are associated with it, understood what's the realm of possibility of building the spacecraft and building the instruments.
This is a very good answer indeed. And as they would say in media, stay tuned and watch this space. No
Yes.
pun intended. And of course, you will find of many of our scientists would be quite willing to also, comment once the plans are there and see how they can help maybe translate is the wrong word, but sort of engage with the science and the data that will be coming out of it. It's really very exciting. Here's another question from the field that relates to all these questions. It's very interesting that you are both Minister of State for Advanced Technology and chair of the UAE Space Agency. And they have slightly different roles, of course, in the society and government. How do you help both of them work together, sometimes in parallel, sometimes coming together for mutual benefit?
It would depend on the program and the overall objective in terms of when are things aligned and when they're not. It's not influenced by me, but space has been identified as one of the industries that have a potential of growing within the country just by the environment and what I described earlier on. And I guess it's based on objectives. The two organizations function differently and they function with different objectives that they need to deliver to the UAE government. But when there is an area that is of mutual interest, we would transfer it on between teams. I think we have today, at least the way we operate within the ministry is a good understanding of who plays what role when sort of situation. And if a portfolio is handled by an entity, we trust that entity in terms of delivering towards it. So I don't have a clear-cut answer, but we take it based on a program by program perspective to see where it's the right place to sit it.
Would it perhaps be fair to say, I can understand that there are all these different answers depending on what the particular project at hand is, but would it be fair to say that the space agency is indeed more focused on these national missions in space and what happens there in the data that come back and get processed and so forth, whereas in your role promoting the development of defense technology, you're literally more on the ground in the UAE, working more with companies, stimulating those interactions?
So within the space agency, we do two things. We build capability and capacity in the space sector. So it's across the board, from universities to private sector businesses to those individuals that want to start their businesses. And what you're creating is opportunities and risk offset. So space exploration is risky, therefore it's an endeavor that the space agency does. Space offset, risk offset is when we provide different programs to businesses so that they're able to build heritage while they're developing along the way. So these are the two mechanisms that we operate in within the space agency. Now, in the perspective of the ministry, what we focus on is with regards to infusing technology across and making technology a tool across existing industry to increase competitiveness and efficiencies, and establish new sectors and ensure that there's a right business environment to establish those new sectors, and aid development overall from a policy, regulatory environment, and also from an incentives perspective. So that's mostly focused on industry. And then we have the research and development portfolio, as you know, Marriott, with the establishment of the Research and Development Council of the UAE, headed up by His Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and providing that oversight of the entire research and development spectrum, and ensuring that it's continues to support societal development, continues to support social development, continues to support technological advancements, as well as industrial and economic development.
That's a very good clarification. And I wanted to ask you in particular about this exciting partnership that you've engaged in on behalf of the Space Agency with the Ministry of Climate Change and the Environment, launched at Expo, Space Week at Expo. You must have been super busy, where a competition was announced to generate ideas for how we would use data gathered from outer space to create services that could support environmental practices, maybe agricultural and food security ones. I found that a very inspiring idea, because normally when I think about other countries that have pursued their space programs and what they do with it, it's sort of a little bit internal. It tends to be focused on the scientists who are already there. This was just an open call in inviting citizens, residents, people who think about these things to come forward with ideas. What kind of proposals are you hoping to see?
Practical solutions, I'd like to say. And the reason for that is this program, I spoke about demand creation. This program fits in creating demand for space products and services, and therefore ensuring that there is a practical solution that demonstrates how you can use space technology to address some of these challenges, and more importantly, how you can, in the area of, for example, food development, food production, how can you increase production while utilizing the less resources, which then goes on and benefits the environment. So it's a twofold approach in terms of what we're looking for. One, we're starting to create a business model around space and why space is important for other sectors and how people could benefit from it. And at the same time, giving people a taste of what they can do without needing to own their own spacecraft, because the data is available outside. So that's a capability development aspect. So there's demand, capability development, and then hopefully through seeing what we get, we're able to expand on capacities, and we're able to cover the three different aspects the Space Agency works on using this program, and hopefully with more programs to come that tackle all of these different challenges and create opportunities.
It'll be very interesting to see what comes out of it. And there's another question here about that intersection between the economy and the work of the Space Agency and the ministry. So here's an NYU Abu Dhabi alum, Mohammed, who works with a UAE-based space company, working on the niche field of space agriculture, with regular ample support from the Mohammed bin Rashid's Space Center and the UAE Space Agency, among other entities. And he says, we're constantly looking to work with local government entities or other entities to enable our work. So he wanted to ask, what are the ways that the Ministry of Advanced Technology engages in projects with companies? And how can he and his entity go about getting involved? What are some of the pathways to connect with your ministry?
So I would actually direct them to the space agency because they
Okay.
work very closely with space companies and in ensuring that they find the necessary business opportunity and to be able to elevate their platform. That's what the team there is currently doing. What the ministry is doing is ensuring that there is the competitiveness aspect of the space sector is there. Challenges that are within the ecosystem are addressed. But if it's a space specific company, the space agency should be able to support in expanding business and in providing information to people with regards to what these products and services could be, and inevitably marketing for these companies as well.
So much of this is so new because, of course, the privatization of the space industry has really gone forward a lot in this century. So I imagine that you must be interacting also with the law and the whole regulatory framework to be developed. Is that a big part of what has to occupy you as you think about these portfolios you have?
Yes, and regulatory comes with space has also international accountability, but really international accountability that's not really demarcated in any way. So a lot of it is open to interpretation. We do have a space law in place. Before putting the bylaws, we're also reviewing a lot of our policies and laws that are to ensure two things. One, you ensure the regulatory environment and ensuring that there's no sort of negative implication from the utilization of space. And at the same time, you need to look at it from the ease of doing business perspective and ensuring that you're avoiding problems from happening by prohibiting people to enter into the space sector. So that's what we always have in mind. And I think we do that also within the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology. It is continuously saying that one, is this policy working currently? Is this law working currently? Does it need to be revisited? Does it enable business and at the same time provide the necessary support for the overall industry and so on? So there's several questions that myself and the team continuously ask ourselves as we continue working in the field of regulations and public policy to ensure that it doesn't become something that's set in stone. I don't believe, even with laws and even with policy, I don't believe they're set in stone. I believe they're mechanisms to govern that are set at a period of time with the knowledge of that period of time. And sometimes, yes, it reflects very well down the line. And sometimes it may not reflect well down the line. And I think the governance, at least I'm grateful for the governance framework that we have in the UAE that allows us to revisit, relook at it. You've seen yesterday an announcement of the biggest legislative overhaul in the history of the country.
Yes, yes.
With it was tough work on a lot of people, but it was necessary to do, and it was necessary to go through. There was nothing wrong with it, and I thought last time I really loved the process that we went through to be able to get this, and it's a lot of these questions, and I see my counterparts around the world sometimes struggling from not having that agility in governance that it's sometimes prohibitive to development. So I'm grateful at least to be in a position working within a government that allows for agility and allows for these questions to be asked. And I've sometimes gone and said that this is the best solution that we have today. And I know because of the unknowns that some things might change, but we need to go ahead with it and gotten the green light on that with that full knowledge of this is what we need. And I think if we go back to the COVID experience, this is what helped us. It's being able to make decisions, knowing that you don't have all the information and knowing that you have an ability to revisit them. But a decision needs to be made. So just retrospectively, I think that's what I've appreciated a lot over the course of the last 18 months.
I think we all have. The pandemic response has been amazing. And what you're speaking to, I think, is the value of being a young country. But not every young country gets that right. And so the active work to revisit these laws when the country has evolved and it's become so infinitely more open to the world in so many different dimensions. We are at Abu Dhabi are part of that. is indeed very encouraging and heartening. Let's ask you a little bit about careers and career preparation in the space and technology sector. I know there's some questions here also about leadership that we will get to. To start at a high level, from your perspective, what types of skills, attributes, mindsets are most needed for the future of the space industry today?
I would say everything. I'm not one to sort of narrow it to one area. The reason I say everything is because you're focusing on business. So marketing is important, entrepreneurship is important, risk taking, I would say, is the common thread that is necessary across the board in the space sector. Being able to take on risks and mitigate them and create opportunities out of them is very important in the space sector overall. But in terms of skills, I would say it's across the board, and sometimes it's not even deep engineering or scientific skills that are necessary for the business to move ahead.
Yeah, I think quite a few of our students are very aware of the opportunities in space, private and governmental, as well as advanced technology. What advice would you have then for our students who would like to prepare to start careers in the industry? What are some do's and don'ts, you think, especially what are some do's?
Do's is be open to experiencing things, especially very early on, and work in an environment, especially if you're in technology and want to work in design, and ensure that you're working in an institution that actually does design of technologies and development. And sometimes it could be within the UAE, sometimes it could be outside. So I personally believe the first 5 years of anyone's career is about being a sponge and just absorbing a lot of experiences and a lot of know-how and a lot of mechanisms to do things across a path forward, depending on where the person wants to head. And I do believe that industry, I've been lucky to work in government, but a government that functions as industry in terms of design and development. But if that was not the opportunity that I had, I would go into the private sector and work in an area that built on the area that I was really passionate about, which was design and development. But take on opportunities. I've done it for so many years, and I continue to do it, even if it's an area that I have maybe relatively very low experience in, like building a science team to go to Mars. But it's been such immense learning journeys and very humbling in the process.
That openness to experience and to what you didn't already know in those first years is so important. I also think early on in our conversation, Sarah, you talked about solving all these software problems and really putting in the time and the work. One doesn't just become a manager or supervisor. You really have to sort of know your onions, whatever that is in whatever field. And I think that's very true for this set of disciplines as well. And of course, not everyone in the space industry has to be a scientist. I think that's very important as well, what you just indicated. However, we are starting to prepare students for careers through graduate programs. So we are really thinking about how to prepare also our graduate students. So these are the postgraduates. And Professor Andrea Macho, who's director of our Center for Astroparticle and Planetary Physics, is asking on behalf of our students, how do you see the need for graduate students, so more advanced and indeed specialized students, to be prepared to enter the space science sector in the UAE? What are you looking? What do you think the UAE is going to need in that regard?
Okay. So the major areas, since we have a mission launching to the asteroid belt in 2028, it's that kind of science. So the science that's associated with the origins of planets and planet formations and what exists within the asteroid belt and why it exists there. Where did it come from? So that's an area of science that is very important. The area of resources and understanding the resources that are available in space systems is important. The Emirates Mars mission and the area of science that it provides with regards to planetary atmospheres and Mars atmosphere also will continue down the line. That timeline is about 3 to 4 years of operation that's left on it. That's its current mission plus extended mission. we're being very nice to the spacecraft. So we're trying to extend it over its design lifetime. So the operations is something that we are very considerate about to ensure that the spacecraft lives beyond its 4 years design lifetime. And we've seen that happen to a lot of spacecrafts. And that will give a good few years of data around Mars. So that's currently what's on the table with regards to exploration and sustained exploration of outer space. But if you would like to have a conversation, I can put you in contact with the team at the Space Agency to see how we can work together on building priorities and seeing where they take us from there.
Wonderful. Well, Andrea, that's a great offer to you. And solar system studies, clearly we're hearing, are going to be much on the mind of the Space Agency and the ministry. So I think that's wonderful. Thinking about, again, that privatization of the space race, I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime. I thought these were big government projects. I'm sort of a child of the NASA era, you could say. And the political era, the Sputnik and NASA era, as you put it, and obviously things have been transformed by companies like SpaceX and many others entering this sector. If you think about the balance, the size of the industry, the space industry in the UAE, as far as you can see it, can you give us a sense of how much of it is going to be government driven and supported, and what percentage or what shape of it is going to be more private? I think it would help our students think about how to prepare to participate meaningfully.
So just to demystify, yes, there is a private sector in space, but if you go back, I'm talking internationally in countries that have well-established space industries, a lot of the contracts are by government. And the reason for that is it's its biggest customer of the space sector. You do see space tourism and so on coming on, but the biggest customer of the space sector is usually government. Its role is to offset risk and take on very risky programs and projects and be able to build those capabilities that then spill over on different sectors. Companies, once they get a foot up, are then able to go and develop their businesses by business to business relationships. And that's why we're also focusing on demand creation, because you're not going to sustain, and I think a lot of countries have realized that, including countries that have massive budgets in space, that they're not going to sustain spending and addressing all the areas of space that they wish to tackle by just having a government to business relationship. And there needs to be a business to business relationship that continues to be fostered in a cost effective manner. So that's what we're capitalizing on. In terms of percentage, it's hard to say because it would depend on how large the industry grows within the UAE to better understand what the incentives are. It will take us about 5 years, I would say, to better understand who's going to enter into the space sector. And as you know, apart from the usual big players that you all know about, there's very few small companies operating in the space sector in the UAE. And you need to build enough critical mass to be able to understand how the spending needs to be and how it needs to be directed. So as we continue to foster those capabilities and encourage more people to enter into the sector and increase, and I've been saying this a lot, but I really believe the space sector is a demand-driven one. If people see the benefit of it, only then will it become something that is above and beyond just having an exploration program. That's an area that we are currently working on to then go and be able to say that this is the right mix in terms of government spending versus private sector spending.
I think this is an incredibly valuable clarification you've made for our community here and for anyone. There's often this thought that, for instance, in the United States, that in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was this heyday of science and all this entrepreneurial work. It was driven by government spending. NASA, NSF, NIH, without those big grants, these things can't get off the ground at the scale that you need. So that's where the percentages are hard to say, as you say, but it isn't without that commitment of a country, whether it's through the regulatory framework that makes it easier, as you say, or significant spending, you can't just launch a bunch of space companies. I think that that's a really great comment for all of us to think about. And of course, space travel and space tourism, that is one thing that may help a bit, but I still have to say, I think it's hard to imagine this will ever be a huge part of the space sector.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm wrong. What do you think about space travel for tourists?
It's with the number of companies that are currently in play, it's good in a way in terms of driving costs down. The other aspect of it is it's increasing the speed by which technologies are being developed
No.
for exploration. So there's an upside if people have a fundamental issue with space tourism. There's an upside to it where it's really expanding technological advancements and technological development. And that's a plus side that I see from this. Will this continue to increase? I would go back to human curiosity. We are curious by nature, and I think people can foot the bill and go for a moment, see this planet from space. It is something that is exciting. It's something that appeases curiosity, and it's something that it's interesting to do. So I do believe that demand will continue in this area.
I agree with you. I'm of a certain age now, but if I were a little younger, I would be stepping up if I could do it and volunteer and hope that someone would pick me. Because at the moment, of course, it's still awfully expensive, but I do have that yearning, I must admit, even though I think the physical risks and biological risks to people are very significant. But some people will do it, like climbing Mount Everest. You know, it's not for everyone, but it's important to have witnesses who did it. And that speaks to that aspirational part. Let me ask one question more about leadership and how you, once you get to a position like yours, deal with all these matters. And here is a wonderful question from Uljad, who asks, how do you deal with the responsibilities of leading one of the fastest growing space programs in one of the most uniquely growing knowledge economies? What is the process of managing to measure progress realistically and set realistic goals? I think it's a very good and challenging question if you're in such a spotlight as you are. How do you do that?
Based on what we need as a country. That's what it fundamentally boils down to. And it's setting the right objectives, preparing the right team to lead it, and then holding ourselves accountable and measuring ourselves against delivery before anyone else comes and measures us. And that's the mechanism by which, by which we follow development in and move forward with our programs. I hope I answered the question, but the question itself was very daunting. I did not think of it that way.
It is a little daunting. And I guess it's also about, I would say, yeah, you have to manage your stakeholders, but you don't want to promise more than you can deliver. At the same time, I'm sure there is a lot of pressure, and you're very driven yourself to deliver these things. So then getting the right people in the right place to do the work with you. And that leads me to another question, really. You've spoken with me before about building the science team for the Mars mission, the Amal probe. Hope is its word. And it's just such an amazing success that I want to ask you how you thought about building that team, how you did it, and especially how did you balance the specific kinds of expertise you needed, and then also sort of overall qualities that could deliver in 6 years, as you said. How did you go about it?
I think I do believe that this was the biggest challenges that I personally gone through. And the reason for that is it takes at least a decade to develop a good planetary scientist, at least a decade. And that's on top of normal education. I'm just talking about graduate and postgraduate education. And it takes even longer to build depth and grasp depth in a subject matter. Especially in a niche area, because Mars we've sent a lot of spacecraft as human beings to Mars. So there's a lot of granularity into some of the details. So the area that we would tap into is considered a niche area, or not a niche, but a significant area, but a niche area within planetary exploration. And at the same time, our on-set objective was to build capable Emiratis that are able to analyze those areas. And at the time that we started looking at building the team around 2014, once our science objectives were set, we did not find physics graduates. We didn't find people who were interested to work in space science. This was before the hype. Now it's easy to find them, but back then we weren't able to. We went to universities around the UAE. No one was focused on Mars atmosphere per se in the areas that we were looking at. So that proved even difficult to find mentors here. So the approach that we took was bringing in very, very experienced scientists from around the world. It was really a privilege to work with them, some of the greatest minds in Martian atmosphere. And bring in a team who was, I would say it was very brave of them to actually come and say they were engineers by training, and they declared that they were okay with basically upending their entire careers and changing the fundamentals of what they studied. I think you would know, and a lot of us would appreciate that an engineer's way of thinking is completely different than a scientist's way of thinking. It's really difficult to change the way that you think and approach problems and approach challenges. And I think that was one of my biggest challenges with the science team, where I continued to think as an engineer and worked with scientists. It's just two different ways of thinking: an approach to problem solving, an approach to opportunities, and so on. And we worked very well as a team, but a few individuals came up and said they were happy to change their careers. And one of them is currently leading the science team after I'd had to step down, Hessa, who went through this process. And it was then a series of trial and error, because I came to a group of scientists who were very well seasoned. They've been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years, some of them, and said, hey, I understand that there's an entire doctrine behind training scientists, and I fully and wholly respect it, because it is an accumulated knowledge development process for you to then be able to identify things that are out of the norm. And that's what you need when you're in the cutting edge of science. But we have this mission, and I can't lose out on knowledge and experience. So we need to put them through an apprenticeship program. And we basically sat and trialed and error was the best mechanism to develop researchers through this apprenticeship program, through different projects and programs. We utilized so many different other missions that have gone that had sort of the same data that our mission would have. And then the team started building their capabilities, and we had an intrinsic review process every 6 months to see how the mentorship program was going, how the development aspects were going, were we learning and progressing as we needed to fit. And as you would know, some people progressed very fast, some people needed a bit of development on the side. So we utilized courses and background information and so on. So it's great to see them today working as researchers, as scientists, together with seasoned scientists, looking at the science data of the Emirates Mars mission, working on various research projects. The UAE, the Emirates Mars mission has a special session at the American Geophysical Union, AGU, to present the science results of the Emirates Mars mission. So it's just interesting to go from where we were at and where we are today. I would say it's not an alternative. I still believe that the scientific method of developing scientists is there for a reason and for a purpose. But at the same time, it was what we needed to do to build our mission and ensure capability development at the same time.
It's incredible, Sarah. You were building the plane literally as it was flying, but it is a fascinating interactive model. And I hadn't thought about that aspect of how you did it, especially with American scientists. I think you work mostly in Colorado, I seem to remember, is where a lot of this mentoring happened. Extraordinary. And can you talk, one of the most moving things to me, as I watched the arrival in orbit at Mars, was seeing the images of the Burj Khalifa, on the Burj Khalifa, of the team, and realizing how many Emirati citizens and women. Tell us a little bit how you thought about diversity on this team that you were really building truly from the ground up. How did you think about that, and what was the value? And I'd love to hear you think about that a little bit out loud.
Honestly, we didn't.
You
It
didn't.
moved at such a fast pace where we were just looking for the best people within the team to be able to be part of this.
Yeah.
So it came completely together based on capabilities and experience. We didn't have the time to think about it. Maybe we should have. I'm thinking about it right now for the new mission, just to ensure overall inclusivity, even with institutions, not only with individuals.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was something completely new. Just didn't have time to do that.
How exciting, though, to build like that, and in a way, proving that this kind of richness of experience created this result, and in probably one of the most extraordinary compositions of a scientific team in terms of gender in particular, and Arab scientists. So I find this really very interesting that organically it turned out this way to get this great decision-making team. It can't always have been easy, but it's impressive. Um, Let me ask you, we're almost at the end. It is such a great conversation. Here, someone obviously has gotten very excited about what you're saying and asks, in which way can NYUAD students get involved in the space investigation field after they graduate? Are there any resources, applications? And I would say for students anywhere in the UAE. Obviously, we have others here with us today.
So programs, we will, on the back of the same as we did with the Emirates Mars mission, where we had a program for students across so many different age groups. And we actually just had during the air show, the Planet X competition for the Emirates Mars mission. So the same way that we've done with the Emirates Mars mission in terms of putting competition and having people access to courses and experiences and research opportunities, research experience for undergraduates and so on, we'll build the same program on the new mission once we've identified the overall objectives. So that's one mechanism. Another mechanism for graduates, we're really encouraging people to enter into the private sector or start their business if they have a great idea. So something like the call that you just saw for climate change and utilizing of data is one example. We are working on several of those that will come out throughout the course of next year. So we're able to support businesses correctly, researchers correctly, be able to advance those capabilities moving forward.
Yes, and again, as you've said already, I know that our Center for Space Science, as well as the center I just mentioned for astro and particle physics, they are all in touch with the Director General of the Space Agency, as well as your ministry. So I think there's a lot of connection, but to the students, I would say, you're MU Abu Dhabi students, you're enormously energetic, ambitious, and talented. And obviously, you've heard the door is really wide open for initiative. There's a wonderful question about that outreach function that I think you fulfill so fantastically as a spokeswoman for the UAE space ambition and results. And this is Yad Halabi asks, how is the UAE engaging the average citizen or resident with its space exploration to involve them a little bit beyond sort of the general announcements that everyone is, of course, excited about? Thinking about maybe citizen science, is students maybe thinking about citizen science a little bit, helping elevate the general understanding of space science and the fundamentals of science and research. How are you using that platform? What is that part of your portfolio like?
So engaging people in general science has been one of our objectives, even on the Emirates Mars mission. So today, compared to 6 or 7 years ago, people have knowledge about Mars, as an example. Exploration missions. I recall people telling me when we were arriving to Mars, they listed all the challenges that we can possibly go through. And these were technical challenges.
Amazing.
We had people from every single age group going through that. So it's so many different programs that we put into place. We managed to get to children as young as 2 and 3 years old, all the way to households through different programs. So we'll continue doing these engagement programs to provide people the necessary appreciation of science and appreciation of space exploration. And on the front of the ministry, also an appreciation of technology and the role that technology plays and the importance of it. And its indirect impact to everyone in society. And it's through these different engagement programs that is part of, I would say it's part of our job to do that, because without getting the necessary understanding and appreciation, it becomes very difficult to weave it into the fabric of our country, and make it become something that is absolutely fundamental to our development.
This is indeed a huge transformation in understanding. And again, to your point about aspiration and curiosity, obviously you have been fueling this. And in this context, and because it is the Golden Jubilee week, I wanted to recount for our audience in something story that you've probably heard many times over. Early last week, I had an interview and presentation with His Excellency Zaki Nusseibeh about the early days, and he specifically made a point of talking about the moon landing and how Sheikh Zayed was very impressed with this and talked about it, and how certain members of the society came to him and said, this is fake news. You cannot just travel to the moon, this is made up. And that there was quite a bit of skepticism, and then as I met with Neil Armstrong, I believe, and so slowly but surely it seeped in. And then, of course, the next thing you know, you have Hassan al-Mansouri going into space, you have the Mars mission coming. So the length of the journey, but how quickly it's actually evolved, is indeed very impressive. So I want to congratulate you again on that aspect too of the success that you've propelled.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Last question, and that's the one I typically ask almost anyone who comes to these conversations. Not just about space, but anything at all. Encouraging our students who are coming out of the hardest moments of the pandemic and thinking ahead to their future. They've kept going, which is what's so great about our students. They really have kept going despite enormous challenges of imagining the future the last 2 years. What is some of the advice you would give them as they prepare to enter the world beyond our university?
Something I've spoken about earlier, which is be open to experiences, be open to taking challenges. And sometimes be open to changing your career, because you never know what could be lying ahead. And at the end, you would always excel in what you're passionate about. So make sure that it's something that you're passionate about, not something that you're robotically approaching as a job.
Really good advice. I've changed careers a little bit from time to time. Of course, I'm tempted to say, please don't change your career because you're so important to these ambitions. Although I will say, if it is my dream one time in the future to have you teach our students, but that may be some time ahead when you're not quite so busy. Thank you so much. Your Excellency Sarah Al-Amiri was with us. Thank you all for tuning in. We have recorded, I think, and so we will see it. Maybe parts of this we will have available more broadly, but it's just been incredibly inspiring to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Maria. It's always a pleasure speaking to you.
Great. Bye-bye, everyone.
Hi, everyone.